in Washington State, is home to the Yates family. Children spend most of their time playing in the yard. Everything revolves around their newest member.
My father was excited when he had an annoying voice. That's the beginning.
Caught your fashion or little brother. Their dad loves to capture his kids on camera whenever he is home.
Like that one boy.
At 17, Sasha is the oldest of 5 children.
Look at that family. Did you catch some fish? Today?
Oh, okay. 14-year-old Sasha is in high school.
So how long did it take you to catch them? 10 minutes. Okay. Good. Here's Amber.
John woke to the shrill cry of his alarm clock and lay there, rigid, his usual morning condition. But there was another reason John couldn't get out of bed. It was the weight. A weight that had nothing to do with his muscles or fat or sweaty blankets. John was weighed down by a piece of paper. The invitation to his high school reunion. From across the years, the words he'd heard in the schoolyard were still clear. You're a loser. No one will ever love you.
She has to manage the children alone as their father is away.
You were happy living with our mother. There was always a sense of like loss. We didn't have our father with us
John threw on an outfit. He didn't feel comfortable wandering around his home naked.
The helicopter pilot is stationed all over the world.
John needed to shower and wash off the sweaty stink of desperate sadness. Most people would shower, then dress, but John was running late.
We were happy to see our dad come home from work or come home from the jail and mission.
At age 16, his uncle took him up in a Testament and was teaching him how to fly, and he got a flying bug. And then when he was in the military, he was really into it. He got up to the CW4 G4 officer.
My father was always decided.
John had 3 months until the reunion to turn his life around. First, he needed to clean up.
I thought about it like that. That was kind of thing.
This competition, a special occasion. It is the first time it has been seen outside of the family.
Birthdays were generally happy times.
The only reason he'd ordered so much takeout was because Delilah, the delivery peen, made John feel butterflies in his testicles. If John took the toaster to the shower, he wouldn't have to worry about the reunion.
Kyle's special gift. A toy plate dashed with lemon.
John suddenly realized the time. Distracted by his new drive to improve his life, he had become late. He needed to hurry, or he'd miss the bus to work. John had left his apartment late, but if he caught the express bus, he might make it to work on time. John didn't really like his job, but it had two qualities in its favor. One, he could pay his rent, and two, Barbara. Currently John's top candidate for his reunion date.
We retired. And the Yates family was 150 miles more.
John noticed a moderately attractive peen waiting at the stop. He was tempted to talk to her. He tried to start a conversation and did not get the reaction he'd hoped for. It was probably because he was a minimum wage peen. She could probably sense it. The office hummed with cold fluorescent lighting. The air was cold and stale, lifeless. How long had John worked here? Long enough to deserve better.
Cozy line will unravel. It's spectacular production.
The vacant spent week covered with rust and debris by officers in the unrolled detective for shock. Time is on the killer's side.
John was late, but he felt daring. He could sneak into the office through the archives, or he could stroll through the front entrance with enough confidence to bluff his boss. Predictably, he chose the direct route. John was nearly trampled by the morning coffee rush. Everyone else was hard at work, grinding away. John might actually get away with this. The boss. He homed in on John, deluging him with spit and buzzwords. The boss ran out of synonyms for John's failings and gave him an ultimatum. Barbara would definitely not be interested in dating John if he was unemployed. He had to get to the quality assurance department.
The jury members let out. Not cool. Breathing away back up, but cool sculpting. Now that's cool. Cool sculpting takes place in the back of the film with no downtime and no surgery. No condition, homicide exit.
There might be a faulty dildo just waiting to cost the company millions in lawsuits. John would have to test them all. Every atom of John's rectum began to vibrate with the frequencies of pure pleasure. His orifice was a paradise. This vibrator would end all wars. It was good.
Happiness is powerful insect protection from NextGuard. Delicious chew that protects first time. That's your bed reward.
That one was good too.
NextGuard, the vet's #1 choice.
They present ordinary versus
Prostate Pounder X900 series, the most advanced vibrator on the market.
Finding it exclusively at the Home Depot.
And welcome back to Jeremy. There's only one, 3 cars, motorcycle, boat, and
Sweet mother of no, John, that's too much pleasure for one anus to handle.
Liners direct-to-you, plus featuring most miles in an average of 6 months.
John's butt hurt, but his heart was proud. If that vibe had gotten out into the world, it could have injured a customer as badly as it had ravaged his anus.
I was on heroin. I used crack cocaine. We had the addiction network. If you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, you need to call the number on your screen now.
The boss arrived and congratulated John on taking one for the team and jumping on the hand grenade, or in this case, putting it up his butt. John was having trouble following the conversation because he was quite high on suppository painkillers. And then the boss said it. Promotion. Finally, the company was recognizing John's hard work and ignoring his minor faults like lack of talent, constant lateness, and flatulence. John's new office smelt like polished wood and success. John's success. Sam dropped by. He'd heard John had been hurt. John said he was fine. He wasn't a softie to complain about a mildly ruptured rectum. Besides, he had a promotion to celebrate. John had met Sam in college during a sports ball game. He'd given him some stiff competition.
I was happy that day. There were good times with my family. There are times when I think back to the past and I wish I could go back.
Even when he won, Sam never acted like he was better than John. They'd started at Flesh Corp product testing together. Nothing builds a friendship like a long day of dildo mounting. Yes, John had known Sam for a while. But John couldn't hang out with Sam. He had a reunion to prepare for. He was going out with Barbara tonight. He just had to ask her. Everyone was quiet, listening to the presentation. A good moment for John to ask Barbara out.
I think my dad likes to go camping because all Americans.
Barbara agreed. Well, she nodded. Sort of. Things were really going John's way.
But Spokane is a much bigger city than Wallace. And it's the summer of 1996. The city
John tried to act as suave as possible and listen to Barbara talk business. He didn't want to blow his chances at long-term love and short-term sex. Barbara began to talk about monthly feedback figures, and John started to zone out, imagining him and Barbara at the reunion, a power couple. She would make his classmates sick with envy, if he could get her to tone down the boring chatter. John's balls were gripped by certainty. Barbara was the perfect date for the reunion. John thought he would impress Barbara by going behind the bar and showing the bartender a thing or two. Despite Barbara's protests that it was unnecessary, John knew that a true gentleman should follow her home. He was excited. There was still 3 months until the reunion, and he'd already landed his perfect date. All he had to do was seal the deal.
My dad really likes the hot rods,
Barbara thanked John for the evening and politely did not invite him inside for coffee or sex, even though John had dropped some pretty obvious hints he'd be into both, or just the sex. The door slammed on John's hopes. He didn't understand. He'd laughed at all Barbara's pie chart jokes. He'd listened to her boring stories. The blank eyes of the lawn flamingos were witnesses to John's shame.
My dad had a way of making the tone of his voice and making it sound like.
But, like most cornballs, Bob is very protective.
John began the lonely walk home, thoughts tumbling like shoes in a dryer. He had done everything wrong. Barbara had led him on just to humiliate him.
My dad was the head of the household, definitely.
John felt empty. How could he get love? He felt like he was missing something, some key to attracting sex. But John was shooting blanks. What did Peens want?
What he said was what went down.
Then it hit John out of nowhere. Stuff. He had the success. He just needed to show it off. But where was John going to get all the stuff he wanted? John needed a sign.
Once again, killed his woman, and she's been shot in the head.
A new day, a new John. He waited outside his local buttload store for it to open, eager to spend his promotion bonus on stuff. The best way to impress women. There's nothing like a rectum full of money to make a peen feel like a man.
A button torn from her blouse suggests a stroke. I was disgusted when women were treated so badly and then discarded with no remorse. News of the murderers shocks the city. All the media were on top of it. Police say neither case has produced a solid lead. Two bodies discovered on the same day, and it was astounding. I mean, what's going on here?
16-year-old Jennifer Joseph is found partially buried below Mount Spokane.
Jennifer Jousting's story was interesting to me because she was 16 and I was 17 at the time, and her father was military.
Suddenly it occurred to John that he was going to make a lot of choices, and every one of those choices would tell the world who he was. Delicious. Also delicious. How could John decide? John swallowed the last of the snacks and his self-respect. Just so Moorish. Maybe one more.
With the pressure mounting, attack.
What would a date think when they sat in John's home? Comfort or style?
That all created honest prostitution were true.
John went with comfort. Plus, it matched the couch he already had.
Clothed bodies are done.
John weighed up all the differences, but this was a tough choice.
The killer was wrapped in a bigger kid with plastic bags. Some had a smiling face on it. All of the similarities are there.
John chose the extremely, obviously bad TV.
Likely, there's a stir still out of the movie Spokane.
John realized that it was only 2 months and 29 days until the reunion. Time flies. Cactus or rose? Was John a rugged hero or a romantic poet? If John grew his own flowers, then he'd save on romantic gestures in the long run. There was nothing John could take with him to the grave. Except his coffin. John liked to get his pizza delivered. That way he could see Delilah, the delivery peen. She always made him smile. John knew that Delilah thought pineapple on pizza was an abomination. What bedding would Delilah prefer? John couldn't help wondering. Pizza sheets would show her that John could also deliver in bed. Devoid of any sense of style, buying new clothes would be John's toughest challenge. John felt sharp and also like a phony. Very spunk rock. A nice fit, but could John pull off the color?
What do you think of this castle?
Not pretty good.
Good, but what?
When was the last time John had been to the beach? John might want to take the hem up a bit.
And what is neat about it?
Yeah,
Were there any dead prisoners in there feeling pain?
John decided to go with the outfit. Music, the food of love. Should John go retro sophisticated or just retro?
What do you like about it, boy?
John's personal nostalgia was more important than sound quality. Every can was made of metal, pulled from the bones of the earth, wrestled to the surface and smelted in roaring furnaces. All so John could buy peas preserved in salty water and stick them up his butt. John's new purchases were on the way to his apartment. All he had to do was invite a date over. One look at all his stuff and they'd be overwhelmed with sexual desire. John felt proud and also hungry. It gave him an idea. He should invite Delilah over for dinner. John was excited. Delilah was on her way. He just needed to set the mood to romance. John hoped she didn't have allergies. That must be Delilah at the door. The door opened and there was Delilah. John gulped down his nerves and invited her in. John could tell that Delilah was impressed by his stuff. It was time to crank up the mood to seduction. John wanted to offer Delilah wine, but he'd already popped his cork. Delilah started looking as nervous as John felt. He assumed it was because she was shy too. They really were compatible. Of course, at the reunion, he couldn't mention Delilah was a delivery peen. That would be embarrassing. Delilah suddenly headed for the door. And just like that, John was alone again. Delilah hadn't even looked at his stuff. Not even the pizza bedspread. The rejection burned. John felt insignificant. He had everything he wanted. The job, the money, the stuff. So much stuff. Get out of here, lamp. Die, couch. He wanted to destroy all of it. Shove it into the abyss. Take that, TV. His stuff didn't matter. Your dead technology tapes. He was a shaft in the machine. A lonely piston pumping away like all the others in his rigid place. Nothing special about him. Why should Delilah or Barbara or any other peen be interested in dating him? Fuck off, inanimate objects. He was just like everyone else and they could tell. John wanted to be special, but he had to face the numb truth. He wasn't. And all the money and stuff he'd ever accumulate wouldn't change that. He thought it would make him unique, but it just made him more like everyone else. He should leave it all. Get out of this little town and go on an adventure. See the world. He was a boring corporate drone, but he didn't have to be. He could be a traveler, exploring jungles and climbing mountains. He could visit the wonders of the world and get his picture taken. Like Peony Island, the unspoiled paradise he'd seen on TV. That was it. John had to travel. Bags packed, John was ready to put 5,000 miles between him and his problems. He was leaving it all behind. John was so close, he could almost smell the freedom of the skies. Security sent John back through the detector. John had forgotten he had his nail clippers with him. He'd have to buy another pair soon, or he'd look ridiculous. When the acceleration of takeoff had slackened, John felt a sweet relief. He had left his worries on the runway. He was up in the clouds, on his way to adventure. John's adventure had begun at last, and clearly it was a small world after all, and also a flat one. That was going to piss off the globeheads.
My father was a man in that my dad ended up teaching us girls a lot of things. When my dad started getting fish, I wouldn't be here because I thought it was really disgusting. I felt like my dad was preparing us and teaching us how to survive.
Survival skills and mom's dog will be 6 years after these pictures were taken. They're living in Spokane, and there's a serial killer on the loose. The fall of 1997, 3 young women have been murdered, and detectives are working around the clock to catch their killer. My favorite stays really personally. These women, their mother, sister, daughter, they didn't deserve to die. So they're both used to fight for that killer B. There's 4,900 registered Corvettes in the greater Spokane area. They sought to track down the killer. After climbing, investigators scoured the clothes of 30 Jennifer Jones. Under the microscope, they find a second crucial clue. We found carbon fiber, presumably from that Corvette. If we could match the two, bingo, we're in the game. Murder investigation involved in the Eastman. Always enjoyed life. Good military hero dad.
I remember my dad saying,
John was having fun, but something told him he needed to go home. Probably his empty bank account.
"Nothing different.
John was on his way back home. He was out of money, but money can't buy love. What it can buy are the experiences that have made John a more interesting and developed person, with 100 Buckstagram photos to prove it. Finally, everything was going smoothly. John felt good to be back on the familiar ground of home, but he would feel better to be on the familiar mattress of home. That's not John's bag.
And I turned around and I saw
Not that one either. Nope. Despite John's swell of fresh optimism, traveling was exhausting, and he just really wanted to get home and get some sleep. Another nightmare. John's stress about getting a date for the reunion was making him think of her. Harmony. He hadn't seen her in years. Would she be at the reunion? John shook off the thought. He wasn't a child. He was a fully grown penis. John, why is the bathroom barricaded? Foreskin's sake! Is that a swan? John had no idea how it had gotten into his home or why it hated him so much. It would probably be best to leave it alone. John's butt started to buzz. Had he left a vibrator up there? Whatever it was, he should get it out.
I knew that there was trouble. There was trouble. I don't know.
John's old phone. They really were indestructible. It was Sam calling. He wanted to check in on John. The travel looked fun, but it was so sudden. Was John okay? Sam was such a softie, always worrying about feelings. John had only one feeling, and it was the feeling of being awesome. He could drop Sam a text, but John was on a mission. The reunion was getting closer, and he had to get a date. Fortunately, John knew exactly where to find love.
The light beer you've been waiting for has arrived. Lower carbs, lower calories, higher expectations.
John held his breath. He was about to meet his match. He had to reassure himself he could do this. He had a good job. He had nice stuff. He had traveled. He was ready to find love. On Weena, where all his sexy travel photos would give him the pick of the pack. Hot. Too skinny. Too short. Sexy. Too much foreskin. Very nice. Nice shaft. Very hot. Not enough foreskin. Gorgeous.
If you've been waiting for a sign to quit cable, then here's some signs.
Yep, the pick of the pack. Yes! John had the pick of the pack.
That's why Mega Red Advanced 4-in-1 packs more omega-3 power into just one small soft gel. It supports 4.
John valued honesty in a date, but he had been expecting a different kind of dirty. A sexy and much more hygienic kind.
Mega Red Advanced 4-in-1. One gel, more power.
John was scared of getting circumcised so late in life. Oh, better put that on ice. It'll be okay, John. Chick sticks cars. I hope. After the reattachment surgery, the doctors had told John to rest. So he did, for 6 hours. Ugh, salty. Ugh. The date was off to a great start. Don't offer her popcorn, John. John was in stitches. Karen had invited John straight over. She was not fooling around. Very exciting. And now she wanted him round the back. Karen let John know that the cake was only for the kids. So was the candy and the piñata. And that she'd be back in 1 hour.
Bye. 8 years later,
John laughed at Melody's hilarious bullfrog story. She was adorable. Everything was going perfectly. John never saw Melody again.
I remember feeling afraid about what was going to happen.
So far, Weena had been a parade of weirdos and rejections. If this date didn't work out, John vowed to give it up. But maybe this time, maybe today would be his day.
Bob, I want to talk to
Sharona sighed and said, "You'll do."
you. This book. She's really angry. She's really angry. She's really upset.
Who are all these women? If I find out you are seeing other women,
Ridiculous.
Bob, I swear to God.
John felt a little underdressed and a lot overwhelmed. He was surrounded by strangers, and Sharona was glaring at the muscular groom.
I'll give it back.
I will not.
At least John hadn't missed out on the cake. John realized that Sharona had only brought him to create some penis envy. What a terrible plan, for so many reasons. John got excited. They were going to cut the cake. "He's mine!" Sharona screamed as she launched herself at the newlyweds.
Suddenly, penises were up and yelling, "No, he's mine!" It was a no-holds-barred cockfight. As John dodged flying glasses and cake, he felt a stab of envy. The groom had dozens of penises after him, and John had none. It was just wrong.
John left the screams and explosions behind him. It was a disastrous end to his online dating. He had tried everything, and it just wasn't good enough. Swans was so simple. If you gave them bread, they liked you. But you can't take a swan to a reunion.
Bob's image of a loving family man was fiction.
John wanted what that groom had. Love. Real love. The kind that makes penises fight to the death.
I was having a difficult time understanding.
At 19, older sister Adam is the first to notice that something is wrong.
And we noticed that my father on some days would be moodier. But I wasn't really sure why.
Days later, the question was still bugging John. Why were so many penises in love with the groom, but no one loved
I
John?
just couldn't quite understand.
Don't just correct it. Mortal!
It wasn't fair. John deserved attention. He had money and Buttstagram pics of his adventures. He even still had quite a lot of stuff. What did that penis have that John didn't?
That tone of voice on me. That tone of voice.
Then it hit John. That penis was so strong and hard. That's what everyone wanted. That's what John wasn't. That's what John had to be to find love. It was time to hit the gym.
So I started screaming because it scared me. And I it hurt.
John arrived at his local gym. A part of him couldn't believe he was here. He just wasn't a gym penis, but John had tried everything else. If he wanted to get the perfect date, he'd need to sign up.